interested, the fire alarm went off last night at 2:30. I was saying to my wife, like, you know, I hate airport hotels, I hate Hiltons, and I don't like being woken up in the middle of the night. But otherwise, things are great. I'm actually the warm-up act here. I'm going to talk about this. I'm the warm-up act for Fiona. See, I invented this work, but Fiona is our expert in health and care systems, and I'm not. So she knows a lot more than I do. But I want to warm you up, and not in the sense that a comedian will warm you up, although we might have a few jokes. I want to warm you up in the sense of getting your thinking going, okay? Because that's the problem, it's how we think about the design and management of work. Now, I wrote this book because what occurred to me when I was studying, going back in time, is that ever since Margaret Thatcher, it doesn't matter which kind of government you vote in, you get the same in terms of public sector reform. The same. No choice. You see, all these politicians believe in the idea of economies of scale. You know, that we should have call centres and back offices and outsourcing and shared services and IT-dominated change. They all believe in it. They believe in targets. They believe in regulation of the kind where we specify what you're going to do and then we come out and see if you're doing it, and if you do it you get a tick, regardless of whether what you're doing is making any sense in the world. You know, so they all believe the same things. And so I thought I'll write a book for politicians, this is a book for politicians, where I've broken all this down into very small chunks and made the chapters short and for a reading age of 7, so there's no excuse. Because, you know, it's very important that we understand what's wrong with what we've been doing, because that also opens the box on what we could be doing, and indeed we are doing in spite of whatever. Okay? Right. So, I'll take one of those themes, into what I call industrialisation, economies of scale. Okay, now, this began. I should also tell you this, that after I've finished in about half an hour or so, it depends how I feel really, I'm going to ask you to tell me what connections you see to the health service. And I'm not going to talk about health, but I want you to be thinking, have I seen that in the health service? Okay. So let's go back to the mid-80s. Along came automated call distribution technologies, which enabled us to build call centres. And so we saw, first of all, in the private sector, this idea that if we're an organisation with loads of branches all over the country, we can take the telephone calls out of the branches, put them in a call centre, which we'll put in the armpits of Britain, where the labour's cheap, and that'll be better service, won't it? This is kind of interesting. It opened the box immediately. That decision was a cost decision. It was not a service decision, it was a cost. You know, they'll dress it up. Now, what we saw in the 80s it's a new form of organisation, you know, because what we now do is we worry about the telephone work. How many calls do you take? How long do you take on a call? So we start managing people's activity on a daily basis. Of course, they became called sweatshops, didn't they? Do you remember? They still are. And you often find that you have a manager in there that doesn't know anything about the work that's going on, but he's a people manager. Because the job is to sweat the labour, get these buggers working all day. And they inspect them. You know, this call may be recorded for training purposes. You hear that? That's inspection. So we're going to listen to what you do and then we're going to give you feedback. And that will improve you, won't it? Okay? And you work according to what I call the core paradigm, which is how many calls are coming in, how many people have we got, and how long do they take to do stuff? Which is now kind of crept across all service organisations. So that's the advent of the call centre. Now, another thing that then happened was an idea from an American. Most bad management ideas come in America. This was the idea of the back office. You know, it's interesting, you know, when I was a boy, no one talked about back offices. And now we talk about it as though it's all normal, don't we? Well, this is the responsibility of a man called Chase, an American, who said, look, we've got these call centres, and we're trying to sweat the labour, And the trouble is, the wretched customer comes in and interrupts you. So it stops you sweating the labour. So what we'll do is we'll use the front office to find out what they want, and then we will decouple the service from the customer, and we'll send a message into the back office where now, because we've decoupled the customer's gone away, now we can sweat the labour. And so we've got that back office. And what we do in back offices is we typically specialise the work, because if we specialise the work, then we can cut down on our training costs. We standardise the work because we think that if the work has been standardised, then we will be more efficient. You know, so we'll go and buy some lean stuff to make us even more efficient with this standardised work. And we have the same kind of management idea that we're managing activity. How much work is coming in, how many people have I got, and how long does it take to do stuff. Right, now, so there's a basic archetype for an industrial service design. Front office, back office, manage activity, inspect the workers, standardise the work, specialise the work. Now then, here's a question for you. If you work that way, and you're the boss and you're worried about how much work is coming in, how many people have I got, and how long will they take to do stuff, what do you do when demand goes up? This is where you answer. What do you do when demand goes up? Work them harder, that's right, so you work. Who said that? Well done, thank you. Work them harder, so we'll do things like, we're no longer giving you 3 minutes a call, we'll give you 2 minutes 30 seconds.
Redesign your service.
Redesign your service.
Same thing, or put in more people.
Put in more people. Obviously, put in more people. Open a digital channel. Bugger off, now you can get it on the web. What else? Oh, outsource it to India. You know, we do a lot of work in Australia. They outsource it to the Philippines. Outsource it. Find a cheaper cost per transaction. When this all started, we were outsourcing to Scotland, and you know, now it's anywhere around the world. Those are the kinds of things we do when demand goes up. Now, I'll tell you what's really interesting is that whenever you build an industrial service design like that, demand always goes up. And this is a phenomenon I call failure demand. Now, I first saw it in the 1980s when a bank did this. They had a plan for 4 call centres, 1,000 seats in each. They measured how many calls in the branches. They trained the workers, opened the call centres, demand went up. They opened a 5th. They got to the stage where the cost of this so-called cheaper transaction in the call centre was a totally more cost than the original design they had. And the managers, this is men for you, all men, running the call centres in the 80s, they said, wow, you see, the demand, it's because the customers love us. They keep bringing us up. No, dickhead, it's failure demand. About 56% of the demand coming into the bank is failure demand. Failure demand is, you sent me a green one, I asked for a blue one, I don't understand how to fill in your form, he ain't come yet, it ain't fixed, I've still got the same problem. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Are there any connections there to health? Well, what we've been teaching people is that industrial designs don't work. You know, in the private sector, they listen because as soon as they see what you can do, they have this rudder called profit. In the public sector, well, you're going to see today there are people who are making great strides with these ideas. So the question then becomes, well, how do you design a service that works? Well, economy doesn't come from scale. Economy comes from flow. And to understand how to get economy from flow, you need to understand how to manage value, not cost. See, the paradox is, whenever you manage costs, your costs go up. Now, in the private sector, I should say first of all, that what we teach, as Zoe's already said, is if you want to make a change, don't have a plan. The only plan you need is get out and get knowledge. Study the system. So in the private sector, suppose you've got an insurance company with front office, back office design, you get the leaders This is not the improvement team, the leaders. The leaders have to understand this, otherwise you're going to have a train crash. You get the leaders out studying in their insurance business what happens to a customer who wants to become, wants to buy a product, become someone who pays you money. And it starts in the front office. They go, "Oh, I'd like to buy your product, I want to pay you money." And then they break it up into as many as 9 separate little tasks that are sent off to back office places in this country and in other countries. And of course it's all standardised and specialised. And the management assumptions are that the work will arrive in the right places, that the people in those places will have the wherewithal to do it within the standard times, that they will return these things within their service level agreements, and then it will go back out to the customer and everything's tickety-boo. So we get them to follow a case. And if you follow this work, this is what you will do. You will follow a case. It's actually very easy to follow cases in health. You follow a case, and what you learn, what the managers learn, is the first one they studied didn't go out clean. In other words, it created more demand from the customer. And then you know what they do? They go, "Well, John, that was very unusual, that one." They go, fine, take another. Take another. You wear them down. What they learn is nothing goes out clean. Now you see, the failure demand is caused by the whole system. In the call centre, if you constrain someone's time to listen to a need, you'll get failure demand. If you create a separate front and back office, the people in the back office are looking at a customer through their own specialised lens, which is not the same as sitting in front of a customer in the front office. If you standardise the work, you stop the system absorbing variety. You get this a bit like Hilton. You get the service we designed for you. Bugger you if you don't like it. That causes failure demand. The more you specialise, the more you fragment, therefore the more handovers, therefore the more failure demand. If you're managing activity, more failure demand. The whole of that thing is what creates the failure demand, so we should just give it up. So how do you design a service that works? Well, it's very complicated. You basically give customers what customers need. And of course most managers will say, "No, John, you can't do that. You do that, they'll want the shop." No, they don't want the shop, they just want the service, what they want from you. That's why they're there. So the basics of designing a service is if you've got a demand from a customer that says, "I want a blue one," you put someone at the front end and give them a blue one. That's hard, isn't it? But, you see, the hard part is you've got to understand demand. And you've got to understand demand in customer terms. You've got to give up this notion that all demand is work to be done. You've got to separate out the failure demand, because that tells us we ain't working. We've got to get to understand what the value demands are and design a service to give people what they need. So here's a design problem. That demand is going to tell us about the expertise that we need at the front of the system. And we've got to get rid of our preconceptions about, is it this kind of, it's like this with police. You talk about this with police and they say, "Well, you say you need a police officer on the phone." I go, no. You see, they're preoccupied with job roles. What I'm saying is if you actually understand the nature of demand coming into the system, that will teach you what expertise you need to put there. Don't think civilian cop. Think demand teaches you value, teaches you expertise. And then the people that are there, you don't constrain them by giving them limits, like 3 minutes or whatever. You move from using arbitrary measures to actual measures. So we're not measuring you on adherence to 3 minutes. We're understanding how long it actually takes, because that will improve our resource planning. Again, this scares managers, because they think, "Oh, you do that, it'll take as long as they like." No. They came to work to serve people. We need to understand how long it takes. We need to use actual data, because if we improve what we're doing, the time will shorten. If we try and solve more problems at the point of transaction, time will lengthen. Doesn't matter. But you'll understand what's happening if you measure actual time, not use arbitrary measures. Now, you can't solve everything at the first point in the transaction, although you'd be amazed how much you can solve. So some things are going to have to be passed elsewhere. But bear in mind, there is no back office. You know, so if you're going to have to pass something to a technician to go out and fix a computer, or a repairman to fix a house, or someone to fix a pothole, whatever it is, then you have to worry about the information that comes from the front going to that place where they have the expertise to do the work, being clean from the point of view of the recipient. And how do you do that? Well, you don't have standards and the like. You get the people who pass the work to talk to the people who receive it and understand what good looks like. And you measure, again, actual performance in customer terms. So it's about measures that relate to the purpose from a customer's point of view. So you might measure end-to-end time, you might measure delivered on time as required. I'll give you an example of that in a moment. Now, these systems produce amazing results. I was talking to people in Denmark who work in there, an insurance company, their sales organisation, and we've got rid of all the, or they have got rid, because they studied it, find out what's going on, got rid of all the normal sales paraphernalia of activity measures and targets and incentives. And they're focused on customers and measures against purpose, and sales are up 35%. Yeah. And this is how we get our work. Because then people go, oh, how do you do that? And they visit, they love it, they love doing industrial tourism, don't they, managers? Oh, let's go and visit and learn. But what they get told after they visit is, don't copy what we do, go and study. Because it's the studying that changes what's in your head. Because you realise these are dumb ideas. You realise it for yourself. So let me give you an example, which maybe is close to health in some respects, and that is housing repairs. Because to me, as a systems thinker, housing repairs is what I would call a break-fix system. Okay? And there's a lot of health that's like that, isn't there? Break-fix. In fact, I think that's when health's at its best. You know, if you have a traumatic event, it moves brilliantly. I speak from personal experience. And then once the traumatic event is over and you're being put back on the road, it's shite from then on. Just get off the fence. So let's talk about housing repairs, because this is how it's conventionally designed. And it was designed by these people. Because these children in Whitehall, who work for the ministers, called SPADs, you know, policy people. I mean, I can't get over this. I go out and have dinner with people and they say, oh, I'm so proud. My 20-year-old son has just got out of university, he's got a job in the Treasury. Wow, that's exciting. What's he doing? He's writing policy. and these policies become what people like you have to do. That's knowledge in action for you, isn't it? So let me tell you what the children came up with from Whitehall about housing. And so basically the design goes like this, that you're a tenant in social housing or local authority housing, and your house needs fixing, and you call up, of course you get a call centre. And the job in the call centre is to do two things. It's to listen to you describe your job, and then choose which target applies to this job. Because these people in Whitehall, they know about these things. And they've categorised some repairs as emergency, got to be done in 24 hours, and urgent 7 days, and others, normal, 28 days. You've got to allocate a correct target to this job. And the other thing you've got to do in the call centre is you have a look at the schedule of rates. This is a bit like protocols. This is all the steps you're going to take to do a certain thing and the materials you're going to need with some associated points for the tradesman, because you know how it is, points mean prizes. Yes, that's right. And that's your job, and then you do that and you ship it off electronically. And it lands in the supervisor's inbox on their computer. Because we think this is work, don't we, computers? And then the supervisor allocates this to a tradesman, and the tradesman pops along to the storeroom to collect some relevant materials, and then they pop into the house and fix it. Now you think, don't you, what could possibly go wrong? Well, guess what? When you study, you learn some amazing things. Now you can go into, I mean, I was one of the people who lobbied for getting rid of the Audit Commission. You know, because the Audit Commission will go into housing and they'd say, well, are you following all of that? Can you show me evidence? Are you meeting your targets? All that. Are you doing your customer satisfaction? In which case we'll give you a tick. When you study it, you learn it's crap. One of the things you learn is that half the demand into the call centre's failure demand. He ain't fixed it. When's he coming? He didn't turn up. He put a thing through my door and I was in. That kind of stuff. When you take the leaders out, as we must do, and stick them with a tradesman for a few days, and you just focus the leaders on one question. When the tradesman walked in, could he, they're mostly he's, could he fix it there and then? If not, why not? It's amazing. They fix less than 30% of the stuff that they turn up at. It's amazing. Do you suppose it's going to cost you less or cost you more? You know? When you measure the true end-to-end time from a customer's point of view, from when I said it's broken to when I get it fixed, you get a major shock. You find the average can be as much as 150 days. It can take as long as 200 days. And then you start seeing what's going on, you see, because you start learning that a job from a tenant's point of view can be broken down into a number of jobs in this design. So they get a broken window and they call up and someone comes out within 24 hours and boards it up, tick. But then we've got to do glazing, we've got to do plastering, we've got to do woodwork, we've got to do stuff. And we separate all those things. So it can take forever. It's impressive, isn't it? But apparently we're meeting our targets. And the other thing they do is they control their materials by worrying about unit cost. Have you ever heard of this idea? You know, well, you all buy bathrooms. Why don't you buy them together? Because that'll be cheaper. Oh, really? Bless them. So you go out and buy a load of them. Where are you going to put them? How dusty are they going to get? How much are they going to get raided for bits? And they see all of this. We get them to go and take a look at stuff we've got in stores. When did we buy it? And what do we know about the rate of use of them by the properties? The rate of consumption. We get a shock. They find they're buying things because they're cheap that they're not using. They equally find they're not buying things they should buy because they think it's expensive. So you think that's expensive? What about what you do? So, how do you redesign it? Well, I hope you're getting the idea. You've got to start with every transactional service, you've got to start by understanding demand. And when you study demand in housing repairs, you learn it's entirely predictable. Entirely predictable by geography, because these estates were built at the same time, at a certain point in time. And they have certain weather conditions and all that stuff. You are amazed at how predictable the demand is from a property point of view. That enables you to do two things. So just following the same logic that I talked about before. We can now put the expertise that we know we're going to need into the tradesmen. The second thing we can do is we can ensure the tradesmen carry the materials they're going to need, because we know they're going to need them. The way they've designed this, the first people to do this at such an outstanding level was Portsmouth City Council, run by a guy called Owen Jones. You'll find him on one of our e-learning sites talking about this. He was the originator of this work, as much as he's the first leader to do it. they can now deliver repairs to tenants in Portsmouth on the day and at the time the tenant wanted it. I mean, if BT could do that, we'd all cheer, wouldn't we? You know, they say that waiting for BT to come and fix your phone is like tantric sex. You're in all day and no one comes. How do they do it? Well, they've understood demand, they've put the expertise and materials in the right place. So if demand comes along, got a problem, we fix my house, and the call centre then says, no problem, when would you like us to come? What day, what time? Now when they started doing this, the people on the phone again, no, I rang the council. Yeah, no, we are the council. That's how it works. You either give us a day at a time or we'll give you one, because that's when we're going to come. And then the tradesman comes. Now you see, the secret of that is they have staffed to what we call the upper limit. You've always got a tradesman along when the work comes, because that's managing the flow. It means you've got some surplus resource. Oh, that's terrible, isn't it? No, not at all. Because you've got to improve the system as well as serve customers. So when you've got spare capacity, you do that. There's lots to do. So then the tradesman turns up on that day at that time. And they achieve this 99% of the time and fix it. And if the tradesman doesn't have the materials that he needs, he calls for them. He doesn't jump in his van and run around the city looking for them. He calls for them, and the people he calls, they say to him, when do you want it? Because they understand the perfect time to have a bath is when the other one's coming down the stairs. And so they take that nominal value, the time he says he wants it, and they measure against performing against that. Now they don't get it perfect, but they're focused on moving to perfect. All the measures relate to the purpose of the system. Now, these people deliver housing repairs on the day at a time, customer wants it, and they do that at about half the original cost. Not bad, eh? How do you save the money? Well, one way of saving the money is you've gone from fixing things less than 30% of the time to fixing them when you turn up more than 99% of the time. That's increased your capacity, it's made you more productive, as well as the job of a tradesman is now a gas, as opposed to drudgery. And how many calls did you do today? And no, you can't have any spares, because spares are cost. And it's on materials that they make the bigger saving. You see, they've moved away from buying materials on the basis of unit cost, and they buy materials at the rate that the house is consumed. It's really simple. If you want to manage costs out of your material flow, don't measure costs, measure time. And if you can cut the time between when you buy it and when you use it, you will slash your costs. You will even pay higher unit costs for things because it doesn't matter. Time is what you measure when you're managing materials, which you are. So all that was hard, wasn't it? So, let me give you just one example. I'm now going to move into your territory a little, if that's okay. Because it was a few years ago now, we started working, in fact, alongside Bob, who's at the back there. That's where we found him. We were working in this whole space called People's Lives Falling Off the Rails. Okay? So I'm talking here about not just health problems, but family problems, drug or alcohol problems, violence, everything. Now this is important because of all the money we spend on public services, an enormous chunk goes on people whose lives have fallen off the rails. Now, you would imagine, wouldn't you, that if your life fell off the rails, you put your hand up, someone from the state toddle along and sort you out. That's what you'd imagine, wouldn't you? This is a civilized society, right? Well, that doesn't happen, does it? When we studied this, and not us, but the people who do this work, Julie's, where's Julie? Julie's here from Monmouth. She was the first to do this in Wales. Now there's a third of Wales social care services working on this model. But when they all had to study first, what you find is it's not one person that turns up. It can be as many as a dozen or more. And they're filling in essentially the same forms. You know, I mean, if you didn't put your hand up to say, I'm confused, you ain't going to get any better. Or, you know, you're going to be at risk of getting very confused. Well, all these bloody people turning up doing essentially the same thing. And they're all looking at you through their own specialist lens. Is this right for us? And they're all concerned to protect their budgets. Can we afford to help here? Or can we make our targets by closing this case and passing it on so another person will start that whole process? You might get lucky, actually not that lucky, but you might get lucky and find that somebody who turns up actually decides that you are for them, and they provide you with something that they have commissioned. Now you see, these people believe in the market, and they believe in this idea of commissioning, because if we put things out to tender, we'll get lower costs. And if you're going to put things out to tender to get lower costs for people to compete on price, then what you've got to do is create a specification of this is what we want you to bid on. And that means the service that you're going to provide is standard and standardised. And that means that for an awful lot of the people that receive that service, it won't solve their problem, because people's problems have a lot of variety. Now, all of that has gone on and consumed an enormous amount of taxpayers' money, and it didn't help a jot. Not a jot. But everybody involved met their targets. So that's okay then, isn't it? Well, it's not. Because not only they met their targets, but they've also got the problem that they're pretty demoralised. Don't you get a bit demoralised when your goodness or badness is judged by adherence to some arbitrary target or some arbitrary requirement from someone above you? You know, you're human beings. So how do you design the service that works? This is what you'll see in Monmouthshire. It's actually going on in quite a lot of places now and around the world. The whole of Western Australia mental health is based on this basic model. So we go back to how do you design the service that works? It's a transactional service. So what's the first step? What are we going to understand? Demand, yes, demand. As customers' needs. Exactly right. So if we've understood, how do we do that? Well, we do that by understanding historical demand for geography, building that expertise into a team, and then having people from that team go out and meet everybody who puts their hand up. Don't worry about thresholds. And thresholds were there to protect budgets. Forget that. Because you see, if you don't help them now, I think you get better. Do you find social workers inflating need in order to get over thresholds? And so on, it's crazy. So you send someone straight out, as soon as they put their hand up, straight out, and their job is to stay with that person for as long as it takes to understand, first of all, their current need, second, the context in which this need occurs. Very important. Then, their view of what a good life will be, or a good death. Then, what can we do to help them take responsibility to achieve their aim? And then, what services do we need from the community, from the voluntary sector, or from the state to help them achieve that aim? Services directly tailored to their specific need. What do you suppose happens to cost? Most interestingly, what do you suppose happens to demand? You see, demand falls. More people's lives go back on the rails. So happier people, happier relationships, happier families, happier communities. Isn't that the purpose of public services? And again, the measures in use relate to the purpose of the service from the user's point of view. We don't think about You know, the way the health service thinks about integration is let's put all these different things in the same building so they talk to each other. Forget it. This is, let's design an organisation against demand. Let's build the expertise we need from these constituent groups. Let's create a different organisation, an organisation built on demand in geographies. That's the secret. And that's what's going on in Wales, because Wales doesn't have Whitehall, you know. I mean, they've got their own problems, but it's, you know, the minister, I saw a minister last week and they are listening to what's going on the ground. Evidence. So, none of that was hard, was it? Was it? I'm going to ask you now to discuss amongst yourselves any connections that you see from things I've described to the health service as you know it. Okay? So we're going to give you 10 minutes to do that, and then Fiona's, who understands health a lot more than I do, is going to join us and talk about specific examples of this method in